Good morning, and thank you for joining me on Behind the Gavel with Jason today. We're excited to come to you every Friday morning from Kansas City, talking to guests from all over the world. And today I am joined by Hadley Keller, who is the digital director from House Beautiful. We're going to talk about millennials and the antique marketplace, which a lot of people are still confused, thinking that millennials are not interested in antiques. Hadley, how are you this morning?
I'm good. I'm happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. I'm glad you could join us here. Just for those who don't know who Hadley is, and a lot of you will, but Hadley is, like I said, digital director for House Beautiful. She used to work for Condé Nast. She also was a founding editor or Architectural Digest AD Pro, which was a digital, I think, digital only platform for professionals in the Architectural Digest world. She's an editor, writer, design reporter. She's also authored her own book. Um, she has been very vocal in the millennial space. I found out about her from a couple of years ago when she wrote an article called "Please Stop Saying Millennials Killed Antiques," which I'd been saying for quite some time, and I was thrilled to find an article that agreed with that. She's also done she's moderated panel discussions on this. She's also done work with the Black Interior Design Network, bringing awareness and not notoriety, but just awareness to the lack of inclusion and diversity in design and antiques and all that stuff. We'll talk about that a little bit. She's also a maximalist and a vocal opponent of the open floor plan, which is awesome. And she wrote an article basically saying, do not hang stupid signs in your house that say live, laugh, love. All those things and more make me thrilled to bring Hadley to the show today. So how are you doing, Hadley?
I'm good. I love that you brought up some of my kind of most hot button topics. So I'll be here, happy to defend any of those takes.
Defend it like it's a thesis. Awesome. So Hadley, tell us. Let's start a little bit with just about you and your background. You've worked with some great places. Tell us how you got interested in writing, and then how you ended up working with some of these major publications in the design world.
Thanks. Well, yeah, I mean, I've always really been interested in writing. I've always loved writing. I think I kind of joke sometimes that if someone had told me when I was younger that there was a job that was writing about design, I would have done it. I didn't necessarily know that going in, so I took maybe a little bit of a less direct path. But I studied art history in college, and I think what stuck there was obviously the kind of ability to be looking at things visually and pulling information out of that. And I think what I always loved about art history was not just looking at, this single piece of art, but thinking about how, art and design can really, what they can say about, culture and politics and the broader kind of landscape. So I started my career as an assistant at Condé Nast. And then I went from there to that was my way to get in the door there, and ended up working at Architectural Digest for a few years, which was obviously great. Got to work with so many incredibly talented designers, architects. And I was on the print side there, and then moved over to digital, which has kind of been where my career has really gone since then. And I think, the kind of design media world the whole media world has really obviously seen a shift more towards digital. So now I'm excited to be doing that at House Beautiful. We have a team that definitely works across both print and digital video. So we, kind of have our hands in everything, but it's fun to, be able to find kind of new ways to be sharing design stories and inspiration and advice with our audience.
So yeah, it's all. So you mentioned something there about how much overlap is there between the digital and the print copies? Do you guys work closely with each other?
That's beautiful. We're all one team, so we all work on both. So I write stories for print. We don't necessarily have a print team and a digital team. I'm the digital director because there needs to be someone kind of looking after the site day to day, but I still work on both. So that's different than a lot of other places, I think, at least maybe until more recently. So it does give us this ability, though, I think, to look at a story and kind of think, okay, where's the best place to tell this? Is it something that we want to see these, beautiful spread photos of in the magazine? Is it something that we want to dive into a little bit more, so it's longer text and maybe that goes online? Is it a video? So we're able to kind of tell stories in a lot of different ways, which is really fun.
Very cool. Just doing something here. So let's jump back into the millennial conversation. One of the things I love is history and tracing where things came from. Where did the notion come from, or the idea come from, that millennials don't like antiques? Do you have any thoughts on that?
I do. I mean, it's funny, well, first of all, I think there's long been this kind of idea of wanting to say millennials killed, everything. And I think that just comes from maybe a little bit of kind of, discomfort with change and kind of evolution. I think something that's interesting that, I mentioned in that article that you talked about that my friend Michael Diaz-Griffith, who's a very talented, definitely follow him on Instagram if you're an antique person. He now works for the Sir John Soane Foundation, formerly of the Winter Show. And so he said this thing, which I think is really true, that I think people kind of equated this, well, two things. First of all, his point was that I think people equated the kind of, there was a 90s, early aughts moment of really just a lot of kind of beige, gray, like obsession with kind of gray. And people said they hated brown furniture, blah, blah, blah. And I think that kind of got lumped in with the kind of subsequent generation of millennials, but really that wasn't totally us. That was kind of the generation above us. And I think in addition to that, then you have, which we can definitely get a little more into, you have this idea that, millennials are kind of this industry of disruption, and that there are all these startups and direct consumer places, and people are trying to get things faster and more quickly and less expensively, and kind of do all these things that are, disrupting. I know that word is very overused, but really that's what it is, kind of disrupting a previous industry. And I think the irony of that, especially now, and that article was from a couple of years ago, and now especially in our post-COVID world, ironically, that access to if you're shopping furniture right now, antiques are probably going to be some of the easiest things to get because you're not dealing with the kind of crazy lead times of other things. But I do think there was definitely that moment of everyone just wants to shop things instantly online. They want something from Amazon. There's this kind of Instagram aesthetic that's very minimal and gray and white, and not a lot of, the heavier brown furniture that people associate with antiques. And I think it just got kind of, people became convinced that was, what a kind of younger generation of people who were starting to buy homes or rent homes, kind of what they wanted. But I think in the past few years, I'm hoping we kind of get away from that, and we see that that's not necessarily the case.
Yeah, and it's interesting. You talk about the early '90s and aughts. That's like to push that on the millennials. You guys were barely out of diapers at that point yet. That's a lot of Gen X stuff. That's what my generation.
Exactly.
And there's actually been a lot of studies and research. The demographic and society sizes, like the Gen X generations, are small.
Yeah.
It's not that we didn't like the stuff. There's just none of us to buy it.
Yeah.
And your generation and Gen Z is actually much bigger population wise. So I think that's part of it too. But it's interesting when you go back to the grays and the greige. We call it here Johnson County greige, which is a suburb that everything was that color for a long time. So I think you're absolutely right. I want to thank Dan and Sue and others for watching. If you're watching, go tell us where you're watching from, or ask questions for Hadley and myself in the comments. Be happy to address any of those concerns that you have. So you talked about what was once the immediacy of Amazon and buying things online and buying it today, having it show up tomorrow. And the lead times obviously have changed that with pandemic. But what do you notice that you and your friends, because you are a millennial, right? I mean, you're
I'm right in the target. Yeah.
Yeah, you're right in the target audience. What are you and your friends looking for? When you and your friends, and of course we all associate with people who are like us, so that's a bit of a thing. But as a reporter, so what are you and your friends looking for? But then also as this generation as a whole, what kind of things are millennials looking for?
Well, I think I tend to also shy with I know this is the conversation we're having, but lumping a whole generation together is hard. But I will say there are a few things that stand out. First of all, and I think this is something that I've always thought is interesting. It wasn't really connected. Like the concept of having, even with a lot of these kind of disruptor direct consumer startups, there is now, and this is kind of a new thing in the last, 15 years. Every company that starts wants to have this real emphasis on what is the story, where this is artisan made and it's from this place and here's how, and that's kind of the type of company that's been associated with my generation and what we're shopping. And, we want it to be ethically sourced and we want it to have some sort of story behind it. And I think I look at that and I think, well, duh, nowhere is that more the case than with antiques. Like talk about having a story and kind of, being able to, source something, you know where it's coming from, give it new life. And then we also get into the concept that I think my generation tends to be quite environmentally conscious, wants to be sustainable, which again, you know, shopping for antique and vintage really kind of fills that bucket. And then I also think that and I don't know, you know, what necessarily we attribute this to. I sometimes say, but I think this is a little bit of a hot button take, that I think that kind of Instagram and Pinterest being so big when we were kind of young adults, teenagers, really did lead this generation to become a lot more kind of aesthetically minded than maybe others were. We just were so inundated with inspiration, with imagery, more so than any other, you know, group of people in the past had been. And I think that in the best case, what that resulted in is people being able to maybe develop more of a kind of personal sense of style, whether it's for fashion or for the home. You know, you're not just saying, oh, let me just go to, you know, whatever furniture store and get the bedroom set. You're saying, oh, I'm scrolling through Instagram, I'm seeing all this really cool. Oh, I love that chair. I love that bed. You want to have something that's different, and you want to have a space that reflects you, and a space that honestly, I mean, not to, you know, write it off so simply, but a space that you want to share, that you want to, you know, maybe take pictures of, you're going to share on Instagram or whatever. So I think that kind of more personalization of our spaces is something that I feel like had been kind of bubbling to the surface, even, you know, as of even before the pandemic. But then I think, especially having a year stuck at home, you're kind of like, oh, wait, I really do want to be surrounded by things that I love and are meaningful and interesting to look at, and not just like, you know, I bought this, you know, standard issue chair off of whatever site that everyone else has. So I think that there, you know, is now, and I think, I hope is now more of an appreciation for the kind of just more kind of personality and more interest in spaces. And I think that aligns really well with collecting antiques.
Yeah, you know, I did a show a couple of years ago when I did this on myself. I said Martha Stewart is dead to the antiques world, and what I meant by that is when I was in the '90s, there was like 3 voices. It was Martha Stewart,
and
1 or 2 others, and you either liked that or you didn't.
That's true.
But to find those communities like you can on Instagram and Pinterest and Twitter, you have the power of numbers of other people liking it.
Yeah.
And so even if you like what's not trendy, you can find those people who think the same way, and it gives you that confidence to buy the McCoy pottery or the Fornasetti or whatever it might be, because you are around people who like it all the time. You know, Facebook groups is a great example.
No, that's so true. And I think what you said too, that having that confidence is a big part of it too. Like, I think access is really huge as well. Like, let's be perfectly honest. Not everyone is buying, you know, fine European antiques. And I think often, I actually think this is something that the last year of the pandemic was, you know, it changed for the better, is I think to a lot of people, realistically, it's not that they, especially younger people, especially millennials, who frankly are a generation that were dealing with a lot of student debt, didn't have, you know, necessarily accumulated wealth, weren't maybe inheriting family heirlooms yet, or ever. The concept of antique, even, I think, brings up a notion of, oh, I need to go to an auction house and bid. And that's this really kind of overwhelming, intimidating thing. And I think realistically, there's I think a huge segment of people who actually would say, and I think it's funny that, you know, the term vintage is so big. And I know there is a literal difference between vintage and antique, but really you're saying, oh, this whole generation doesn't like antiques, but, oh, they love vintage shopping. And it's kind of like, well, you know, come on, semantics here. I think for a lot of people, it was just this intimidation factor. So you might have someone who's saying, oh, I'm not interested in brown furniture and formal antiques, but they're going to go on Instagram. They're probably following 6 different accounts that are selling vintage, and they really like that. And that feels like an accessible way to buy. So now that I think a lot of dealers, a lot of auction companies have gone online and they're kind of meeting that consumer where they're comfortable, I think that makes it a lot more, makes it feel, you know, then you start thinking, oh, wait, that is, you know, that's not my grandmother's stuff. That's something I can buy and I like, and I can mix it. And you know what? Then, like, this is how I decorate myself, and most of my friends do. I don't have having antiques doesn't mean I have, you know, a period room. I have something that's, you know, hundreds of years old. I have something that's contemporary. I have a mid-century piece. And I think that being able to mix it together is what is appealing, and what makes it feel more kind of human and accessible.
Absolutely. And talking about having different eras, you know, I don't know if you ever watched the show Frasier. You might not be old enough to watch that. Yeah. But I remember one of the very first episodes when his dad was asking about this, that, and the other thing. And he said, nothing matches. He said, well, it's not supposed to. It's an object. the Eames chair and lounger
Yeah,
and ottoman is an object. It's from that time frame, but it stands on its own. The
exactly.
African mask stands on its own. The silver stands on its own. It's not meant to be cohesive, other than the personality of the collector makes it cohesive.
Right, right. And I
Which
think,
I think is
personality is what's key. Yeah, definitely. And I think
yeah.
it's interesting. We had my former coworker Emma Bazillion wrote an article that kind of went viral 2 years ago, I guess, called defining this style called Grand Millennial, which was this idea that there were all these millennials that were, all of a sudden loving antique brown furniture, chintz, pleated lampshades, these things that were kind of what you'd find in your grandmother's house, maybe. And I do think that whole, if you haven't read it, I encourage everyone to read this story because she gets really into, why that, was able to kind of take off. But I think that's, this same idea too of kind of reclaiming those things, and especially putting your own spin on it. You're going to take, okay, fine, maybe you have the same fabric that your grandmother had, but you're going to pair it with something different, and you're going to make it your own, and it puts that kind of new spin and new life on it.
Yeah, I remember that article quite a bit. It was a great article, and it brought in like the whole idea of grand millennial and granny chic, all those terms. Was that Jessica Bennett wrote that?
No, it was Emma Bazillion. I think a lot of people subsequently wrote about the story, so there are now a lot of grand millennial stories, but that was the original one for House Beautiful.
Emma, what was Emma's last name?
Bazillion, Bazilian.
Yeah, it was. I'm just looking up real quick so I can put it in the article here. So you talk. I love being able to just give you a topic and you just go with it, and you cover 6 different areas that I want to talk about.
You can cut me off whenever you want.
No, absolutely not. Please, I'm loving this. So you talked about millennials finding things where they're comfortable, and dealers and stuff finding the buyers where they're comfortable. Can you give us? You talked quickly about it. Can you talk a little bit more in depth about what that means for? A lot of my viewers and followers on Facebook are older than millennial. Like I turn 50 in 6 weeks, and I'm still young in the. A lot of my Facebook followers, especially, are older. What does that mean to somebody who's owned a store, has done shows? How do they access younger buyers where they're living? How do they get to those people?
Well, I mean, first of all, and not to, kind of oversimplify, but I do think, and I say this in the design world in general too, like Instagram is really such an invaluable tool where maybe you would need to kind of hire a PR firm, go to a show, and, rent a booth so that you can meet a viewer. If you are sharing really incredible photography of the pieces you're selling in situ or in an interesting shot, you can, there's kind of no limit to the amount of people you can reach, really, if you're being strategic about it. And I think that just kind of ability, obviously what we do is so visual. You have to see, the thing. In an ideal world, you want to feel it and sit on it. But realistically, I think, I remember even when, kind of in the early days of e-commerce and some of those big furniture companies were selling online, and people were saying, oh, like no one will ever buy. I think it's actually Anna Brockway, who founded Cheris, that said this, at the beginning, no one will ever buy a $20,000 sofa online. And the reality is, as we know now, that's obviously just not true. So, you have kind of the world at your fingertips, so to speak. And I think that, there's also a way of doing, it doesn't have to be, oh, you need to set up a website with everything categorically listed. Like, yes, that's great, and you can do that, but there are also more creative, ways. Even think about something like this, if you're doing, kind of programming, or you're doing Instagram live with some designer you like, or you do a video kind of showing how you, how you are incorporating some of the pieces you're selling in a home, or you're doing interesting photography with different elements, or partnering with people who can share interesting ways of kind of showcasing what you're selling. I just think there are so many different ways now to do that on a kind of limited budget and time frame or whatever. You can kind of do that all yourself, which is pretty exciting.
Yeah, it really is amazing what's available. Both just doing things on your own, but then partnering with people like you said, finding photography. If a friend's a photographer, has any kind of a following, or even doesn't, do some really great photography or interesting photography, or do something different with it.
Right.
It might be approaching it with humor. It might be approaching it with sentimentality, whatever it might be.
Exactly.
if you do it reasonably well, you will find people who follow you, and then all of a sudden you have a built-in buyer base.
I also think it's important to note too that you don't have to have. I mean, I don't know that the goal. I think some people are kind of like, oh, you got to crack the code of Instagram and get 500,000 followers. So you get realistically, especially if you're a smaller business or dealer, you don't. I mean, you're not going to have 500,000 people shopping your inventory in a year anyway. So I think it's actually probably more valuable if you have a smaller. Maybe you have 500 followers, but if 10 of those people are really big shoppers and they want to buy, it's about finding. And so I think that's where the kind of connectivity is important. Find those people, maybe partner with them, or at least follow them, kind of engage with them, because it is about finding that, group of people who are going to be, Jason, you said earlier here, like the kind of like-minded people. I'm obviously somewhat biased because a lot of the people I interact with who are millennials love antiques and they love design, but there's kind of a reason for that, in my professional life, but also my personal life. That's what I like. And so I get excited by following these people and engaging with them. So if you kind of find that, community, that's really all you need. You don't need to have 1 million followers especially if you're trying to sell antiques. You have a limited amount, you have a limited inventory. You're not churning out. The whole point of this is that you're not churning out, piece after piece that's the same and kind of standard issue.
Well, and antiques has never been an all people's kind of a thing.
Yeah.
I mean, if it was, Sears and JCPenney and Macy's would have never have sold furniture, except that they sell furniture. He did, and so it's never been about reaching masses. It's been about reaching
the right people.
The right people. Last week we had Colleen Lynch, no other book like this, and she does most of her sales through Instagram now, and she still, after doing it for like 7 or 8 years, only has 7,200 followers, which is a big number, but they're all people who are interested in what she has to sell. And she sells thousands of dollars of books every month on Instagram. Mm-hmm. And it costs her nothing but some time. And, with Instagram, you go out there to post something, and all of a sudden, 40 minutes later, you've been spending time looking at these great images and interacting with stuff. And so, yeah, it's work, but it's not like terrible work.
Honestly, there are so many workarounds. I mean, I know people who sell, and not that you're a professional dealer, maybe you're not going to do this, but, sell on Facebook Marketplace, even if you don't know how to, first of all, if you don't know how to set up an e-commerce platform, there are many tools that can help you. You can, get a Shopify account. You can hire someone to do it, spend an hour building it for you. But even beyond that, if you don't want to get into that, because I know sometimes it's difficult, especially with one-of-a-kind things, to maintain that inventory. I just wrote a piece actually last year because I was always kind of into this, but even more so during the pandemic, I got really kind of obsessed with shopping antique and vintage things on Instagram. And I follow tons of accounts who are, and not to oversimplify it, you still have to be quite organized, but you can take a picture of something, list the price, have someone, send you money through PayPal or whatever, and you ship it to them. You don't have to necessarily have all the back end. I mean, it's great if you do, but if you don't want to, there are, with technology now, there's so many kind of workarounds.
Oh yeah. It's, I started my career started as a dealer, as a picker. And I used to travel the country doing shows up to Brimfield, down to Atlanta, Florida, Colorado. And people complain about how hard it is to sell now. I'm like, you don't understand. This is so easy today. With Craigslist was a godsend, and that's so archaic now.
No, you still find some good stuff on Craigslist.
Yeah, it just takes time to search it all. But if you're a seller today, there's absolutely no excuse for you not to be reaching people who like what you're selling.
Agreed.
For next to no money. It's just your time is what it is. Mm-hmm. So have you noticed, obviously the pandemic, we're still, we can kind of see the end of it. Although I'm in Missouri, what's funny is the cities are really clean yet, as far as, the third or fourth wave, where they're calling this. You go down to it's like going up to the five lakes regions of New York. You have the cities, and you have the rest of it. It's the rest of Missouri that's bringing our numbers down or changing our numbers. But
everybody,
what have you noticed or seen? Have tastes changed during the pandemic, other than people are spending more time at home and are more conscious and cognizant of what they have? Have you seen any changes in tastes or styles because of that?
I mean, it's so hard to say. I will say, and I could not to repeat myself, but I think the one thing that I can really take away is that I do think people are more appreciative of the kind of personal and the more meaningful. I mean, I have a friend, actually, and this is pretty funny, who has always been kind of notoriously minimalist, very kind of the opposite of my style, lives in a very open apartment. And she said to me a couple weeks ago, she's like, Hadley, you're gonna laugh and you're gonna say I told you so, but being at home this whole year, I've kind of started to get bored of my white walls and minimal everything. So I do think there's something to be said for the kind of wanting to have a little bit more of that kind of texture, but also and then also just I think feeling more confident and okay with, taking a risk or doing, I think, you've been like stuck in your apartment for a year. Like, why the hell not paint that wall purple, whatever you're going to do, like enjoy it. Cause you're the one living in it. And if you like it, that's really all that matters. So I do think, and I'm really excited about that. I think there has been, people have gained a little more confidence in, in the way that they're thinking about their home, whether it's confidence in being able to like do a DIY project, cause they did some this past year, or just, kind of knowing what they want and what they need in their space because they've had to become so familiar with it.
Yeah, it's all good stuff. And like you said, paint the wall purple. If you don't like it, you can always paint it back. Or to pick another crazy color.
Yeah.
Yeah, you could fill it with all these elephants and hot air balloons and stuff. So something that was interesting this last year and a half, and the conversation is much longer than that. And I only want to touch on a little bit here, kind of towards the end of our conversation. And I think the millennial generation is driving this more than any other generation ever thought to. You talk about individuality, personality, finding your own. But part of that for the millennial generation in particular seems to be inclusion and diversity and being open to other ideas. We're seeing just today the Cleveland Indians announced that after this season, they're changing the name of their baseball team. The Washington football team. All these, it's starting to really become a larger conversation. You've been very vocal and out front in this conversation, which I applaud you for doing so, and I'm thrilled that you are, given the voice that you have. But is there? Am I reading too much of this, or is there a tie-in with?
And I mean, thank you for saying that. First of all, I don't want to. I try to definitely be vocal about things, but I also definitely don't want to paint myself as this, any sort of kind of crusader. I think there are other people and people of color who have been, trying to do this work for a really long time. And I think, unfortunately, that it took this long, but I think the good thing is that last year was kind of this moment of reckoning and awakening for a lot of people in a lot of industries. And obviously design is included in that, very much so. I think that a lot of interior design has been, I want to be careful I say this, because it's not that interior design as a concept has been, not lacking in diversity. It's that some of the ways that it's manifested, the ways that it's shown have been, and, things that I've been a part of. And that's, a fault of mine, and definitely something that I have long been trying to, change and improve. And I think the way that I think about it as well is, I think what I love about what I do, and I think what people love about, reading, House Beautiful or Architectural Digest or whatever, any other home magazine. Of course, you want to get those ideas for your own home, but you also want to see how other people live, and you want to get a wide variety of ideas, right? So I think, being able to see different types of spaces, owned by different types of people, decorated by different types of people, the same way we'd want to see a broad range of styles. You want to see a broad range of people and makers and designers included. So I think it is definitely something that's very important to us. And I think that there is certainly work to be done in this industry that has, frankly, for a long time not been very welcoming in a lot of spaces to certain groups of people. And I think that's a problem. But I am optimistic. I think it's, unfortunate that it took a lot of the events that happened last year for this to happen. But, all right, better late than never. And let's, try to kind of move that forward now. And I think you're right. And I mean, I don't want to generalize too much, but I do think you're right that the younger the generation, the more kind of important that conversation is to them. And I think that without getting too, specific to one generation thinking one thing wholly, I think that generally speaking, that is true, and that's a great thing.
Yeah, I think what I've noticed is that there's more awareness of other cultures now and respect for those cultures than there's ever been before.
Yeah, and that's important. I mean, it's really important too in design and in antiques. I mean, there are so many things that I think we took for granted and kind of took as norm without really digging into them. And there are things that maybe aren't even necessarily black and white, wrong or right, but like merit some sort of thought and conversation. I mean, even looking to antiques, obviously a lot of the history of Europe, of the world, has some problematic things going on. So the furniture and the design that comes out of that is going to be related to that in a certain sense. And then you have the more extreme examples too. Like we had a big conversation last year about the concept of the Blackamoor sculpture being sold, and should people be selling those? What's the ethics around that? And I think no. I think there are a lot of I know dealers who've made decisions to not do this or to change. That's just one example, but to change the way that they sell certain things, the way they display certain things, or to think about even the way things are kind of labeled. If you're selling something that has a provenance that is maybe questionable or includes some sort of unfortunate history, then maybe that merits a conversation. Maybe it's something that is clear, and it doesn't have to be that that this means we can't talk about it, we can't sell it. Maybe it's that we should, and we need to look into this. And I think that kind of introspection is really important.
Yeah, I think the conversation and awareness and recognition of what these things mean or can mean is as much, if not more important than the objects themselves a lot of times.
Yeah. Right. And the recognition too that if you're looking at something and you're saying, or I'll just use me as an example, me, a white woman, I'm saying, well, I don't know why would that be offensive? Why would this thing? And you can't assume that the way that you are interpreting something is the way that everyone in your audience, and especially, I said earlier, your audience is kind of limitless now. There are no shortage, with the internet, anyone could be seeing what you're putting out there. Are there people, is there a group of people who are going to have really, painful kind of connections to that object? Okay, then, maybe you need to think about that. Just because it doesn't impact you doesn't mean that, that's the case for everyone.
Absolutely. I think that's so important to keep that in mind. Hadley, we've had a great conversation today. We kind of touched all the keystones. For those of you watching, you can contact Hadley if you have questions about the publication. If you have ideas for stories, we're always looking for great ideas for stories. Hadley.keller@hearst.com. You can find her on Pinterest, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Twitter. And thank you all so much for watching today. We do this every Friday, Behind the Gavel with Jason. It's a lot of fun to do that. You can always, if you have questions for me or for guests, you have ideas for guests, you can always reach out to us at info@kcauctioncompany.com. Give us a phone call at 816-283-3633. And of course, our website's kcauctioncompany.com. Next week, I'm excited to bring in Daniel Mathis, who's somebody on Instagram famous. His title is not a minimalist, because he is definitely not. If you follow Daniel at all, he fits as much into a house as he can. In fact, him and his, I believe, husband just bought a new house that's big enough to hold their collections, and they're renovating it right now. Hadley, before we go, I'd like to give my guests a couple of minutes at the end of the broadcast to kind of talk about anything that's important to them that we either did cover, or you want to talk about more in depth, or something we didn't cover in any relationship to anything we talked about. So with that, I want to give you the floor for as long as you want, to address anything that you feel is important that we didn't.
You're giving me the floor or your audience the floor?
You. Oh,
me. Okay. Well, first of all, I just want to say that I follow Daniel on Instagram, and I'm so excited. I'm definitely going to be tuning in. But I am trying to think of things we didn't cover. We did cover a lot of ground. But I guess I would, first of all, encourage anyone. Again, I'm always open to story ideas, always open to kind of discovering new vendors, new talents, hearing feedback. So I'd love, my inbox is open, so to speak. And I hope that everyone found this conversation interesting. And if anyone has any questions, I would definitely be happy to elaborate if you want to send me an email. Or if you want to send me an email about if you're a dealer and what you're showing, what you're seeing, I'd love to hear. But I think, Jason, you covered a lot, so thank you for that.
You're welcome. And Hadley does a really good job. For those who are thinking, should I send Hadley this information on? She's very, very busy. There's no doubt about it. But she does a really good job of replying and responding and engaging with people who engage her. So if you have an idea for an article, or if you have if you're a new design company, have something that's interesting, reach out to Hadley. The worst she can do is say no. But oftentimes it'll lead to a conversation. She's been really great about it. I'm so thankful that you joined me today. We did cover a lot of ground, and I'm thrilled that we could. Hadley, thank you so much for joining us. Have a great weekend. To those watching us, have a great weekend, and we'll see you all soon.
Thank you so much. Take care.